Gandalf. He is one of the most well-known and popular characters in all Tolkien's Middle-earth. In fact, covering his complete travels was the first hit video on my channel, but in Tolkien's writings there was another notable journey this character undertook, one when he was known as Olórin. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover Gandalf's first journey to Middle-earth. It is the ancient days of Arda. The Valar have helped shape the world and already come into conflict with Melkor, the greatest of their own kind, who has become the first Dark Lord. The Valar would wait many years for the promised children of Iluvatar. Eru would send the firstborn, the Elves, who would awake upon the shores of Lake Cuivienen in Middle-earth. By this time, the Valar lived in the Blessed Realm, across the sea in the uttermost west. However, one of their number would often travel to Middle-earth, where he would hunt the dark creatures of Melkor. And on a time it chanced that Orome, the huntsman of the Valar, rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar, and passed under the shadows of the Orokarni, the mountains of the east. Then on a sudden, Nahar set up a great neighing and stood still, and Orome wondered and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in the quiet of the land, under the stars, he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had so long awaited. And Orome looked upon the elves and was filled with wonder, as though they were being sudden and marvelous and unforeseen. For so it shall ever be with the Valar. We are further told in the Silmarillion that some of the Quendi hid themselves at the sound of Orome riding to them. Melkor himself hated and feared the riding of Orome, and he had sent his own dark servants as riders, or at the very least had sent whispers, rumors to the elves so that they would fear Orome if he should ever come. In the Nature of Middle-earth, we find a chronology that Tolkien worked on in February and March of 1959, covering the Valian years, elsewhere called the Years of the Trees, and here called the Days of Bliss. Here we get a bit more of a picture on the sequence of events. It lists Orome finding the elves in the Valian year 864. One Valian year later, it is said Melkor would seek to attack Orome, and hearing of this, Manwe would send the mighty Tulkas. Orome would return to Valinor, where the Valar decide to make war upon Morgoth for the sake of the elves. Knowing Middle-earth will suffer great damage in this war of the gods, they wish to move the elves to safety. Orome returns to Cuivienen a Valian year later, where in his absence, Melkor has guessed that the Valar will make war upon him. And here he begins circulating lies among the elves, saying the Valar wish to control the Quendi as vassals, and to retake the lands of Middle-earth. In the entry for the Days of Bliss 866, it says, Orome remains for 12 years, and then is summoned to return for the councils and war preparations. Manwe has decided that the Quendi should come to Valinor, but on urgent advice of Varda, they are only to be invited, and are to be given free choice. The Valar send 5 guardians, great spirits of the Maiar. And here we find what is Gandalf's first mission, the first noted instance, chronologically, of the Istari going on a journey to Middle-earth, though they are not known by that name at this time. In these writings, Tolkien actually mentions 6 total Maiar: Tarendor, later known as Saruman, Olórin, Gandalf, Hravandil, Radagast, and Palasendo and Hymenar. The 6th is none other than Melian, the future wife of Thingol and mother of Luthien, who is listed as the chief of the 6. While we can't say with absolute certainty, it's likely that the final 2 names correspond with the 2 blue wizards. Here their names mean Far-Sighted One and Farfarer. Saruman's new name means high or wise-minded one, and Radagast's means wild beast friend. Together with Melian, the 5 who would many thousands of years later become the wizards are charged with guarding and protecting the Quendi. As Tolkien's notes continue, the elven representatives who briefly traveled to Valinor return, and the elves debate whether to go with the Valar to the Blessed Realm. Many are moved by the points of the coming war bringing ruin to the lands, and that they will be free to return later on. In The Nature of Middle-earth, editor Carl Hostetter has also included previous versions of this chronological scheme, labeled as tentative dates. And the interesting note here regarding Olórin and the other Maiar comes in the year 872. Orome and Tulkas are needed for the war. The Valar send the 5 guardians, Olórin, etc., with special power. What is very interesting in this quote is the addition of "with special power," which certainly gives the impression that these guardians were given increased abilities, the opposite of what would happen later. This brings up an important distinction between this early mission and their later one as wizards. Unlike their later appearance as old men, specifically made incarnate and meant only to aid and inspire the free peoples, here there is no such limitation. And if this line is to be believed, they may have even been increased in power for the mission. We are told very little else of Gandalf's days as Olórin, aside from his serving of Valar like Manwe and his learning of pity from Nienna. We are also told of his reluctance to go to Middle-earth when the Istari are chosen, for he feared Sauron, which Manwe says is all the more reason why he should go. We do, however, get one other small moment with Olórin before he sails to the Grey Havens. In some of Tolkien's last writings, found in the Peoples of Middle-earth, it speaks of Glorfindel, the great elf hero who died fighting a Balrog in the fall of Gondolin. Tolkien writes of his reincarnation in Valinor, where he says Glorfindel, at some time, probably early in his sojourn in Valinor, he became a follower and a friend of Olórin, Gandalf, who, as it is said in the Silmarillion, had an especial love and concern for the children of Eru. That Olórin, as was possible for one of the Maiar, had already visited Middle-earth and had become acquainted not only with the Sindarin elves and others deeper in Middle-earth, but also with men, is likely. But nothing has yet been, said of this. But an interesting facet of Gandalf's story is that it's entirely possible that he did not remember this first mission where he protected the elves. While in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf had told Faramir his name was Olórin in his youth, we read in Unfinished Tales that when they became incarnate beings, the early days of the Istari were not well remembered. For it is said indeed that being embodied, the Istari had need to learn much anew by slow experience. And though they knew whence they came, the memory of the Blessed Realm was to them a vision from afar off, for which, so long as they remained true to their mission, they yearned exceedingly. This raises the interesting question: would Gandalf remember his earlier friendship with Glorfindel? And would he have forgotten all about protecting the earliest elves in a completely different and more powerful form as Olórin? But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is who might have recognized Gandalf for who he truly was. For Círdan the Shipwright, one of the last elves to ever leave Middle-earth, was also one of the very first, having been born at Cuivienen. We are told in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings that Círdan is far more perceptive about the wizards than any other. Seeing further and deeper, he welcomed Mithrandir at the Grey Havens, knowing whence he came and whither he would return. Could it be that Círdan actually recognized Gandalf as a former protector of him and his kind? We can only speculate, but perhaps there was more than perception. Indeed, perhaps it was a memory of this great protector when Círdan chose Gandalf to bear his ring of power. sending him on his journey to kindle hearts in a world that had grown chill. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.